Well, to questions of national unity now, as the Alberta Premier was asked to comment on the matter this week. Danielle Smith meeting with the other First Ministers in Saskatoon, where she pushed for a new pipeline that would carry Alberta bitumen from Prince Rupert in BC to Churchill, Manitoba. But she was also questioned about tying that issue to national unity.
Why tie the issue of getting a commitment for an oil pipeline to national unity?
Well, you have to understand just how damaged Alberta is by the fact that we didn't get pipelines built. If we had built Northern Gateway, if we'd built Keystone and we'd built Energy East, we'd have 2.5 million barrels more per day of production, which is $55 billion a year worth of GDP value, which is worth $17 billion to my government alone and about an equal amount to the federal government. So this is not just an ideological argument. It's not just a minor disagreement. Oil is by far the most valuable export for Canada. Any of the projects that you will see on the ultimate list, I will tell you that a bitumen pipeline will be by far the greatest benefit to all of Canada. That's why we're going to continue to push for it, because it's a good project. It's good for our country. There's $9 trillion worth of value in discoverable and achievable reserves right now. And so why would you leave that in the ground? No other country in the world would, and we shouldn't either.
Well, to talk about this, we're now joined by Alberta pollster Janet Brown, principal with Janet Brown Opinion Research. Hello, Janet.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So listen, always happy to have you. But listen, Danielle Smith has talked about pipelines, you know, almost as a salve to heal division some Albertans are feeling towards the rest of the country right now. But I'm wondering, how true is that sentiment? Are these calls to separate all about oil?
Well, we've done a recent poll for CBC Calgary, and what we found out was that, you know, about 30% of Albertans think that Alberta would be better off if it's separated. You know, another 30% aren't so sure, and then 30% are just dead set against the idea of separatism, don't even know why we're talking about it. And you look at this federal election we just had, 64% of people in Alberta voted for the Conservatives. And when you break that down, half of those people who voted Conservative have separatist sentiments. You know, half don't have separatist sentiments, but they want a new deal for Canada. And you look at Danielle Smith's base, 54% of people who would vote for the UCP would also vote yes in a referendum on separation. So this is what Danielle Smith is trying to balance. Her voting base is mixed between supporters of separatist and non-separatist, and she is trying to thread that needle, and she's hoping to get a better deal out of Ottawa. That's how she's hoping to thread the needle.
Okay, trying to thread a needle. And I'm going to dig into that a little bit here, though, because, you know, feelings of Western alienation, obviously, it's not new in this country. Preston Manning started the Reform Party with the phrase, "the West wants in." Justin Trudeau's 2019 re-election, that was followed by grumblings of Wexit, and now this more recent call to separate after Conservatives failed to win government. So how much of this, and you referenced it a bit, but more directly, how much of this Alberta movement is really a small C Conservative movement that we're watching push itself back?
Well, the great thing about this survey that we did for CBC Calgary is we've got tracking that goes back several years. So if you kind of look at where things were at 5 years ago in 2020, we really don't see that separatist sentiment has changed that much over the time we've been tracking. At 30% of people saying we should leave Canada, you know, it's been higher than that, it's been lower than that. What is different now is those who agree with it are more likely to strongly agree with it. So it's intensified as a sentiment. At the same time, folks that identify themselves as Canadian, say they identify more strongly with Canada than with Alberta, that's going up. So yeah, separatist sentiment's been around a long time. I don't think the sentiment is growing, but I do think the intensity of that sentiment is growing.
Okay, so when people call this a fringe movement, then what would you say to that?
Well, I would say 30% is not a fringe. It's far from a minority, but it's not a small group that you could just dismiss. And as I said, you know, when you look at the people who'd vote UCP, if we had an election today, it's half of them. So Danielle Smith certainly can't treat them as a fringe. So not a majority opinion, but it's not a group that you can easily dismiss anyway. So, and now we've got a new government, we've got a new prime minister. Surprisingly enough, Albertans are open to Mark Carney and what Mark Carney can do for this country. So I think we're at a critical path now. The sentiment is strong in Alberta, but with a new prime minister, a new government, Albertans are hoping that the relationship with the rest of Canada changes and that maybe we can step away from this separatism talk for now.
So extrapolate from your numbers, if you will, then, Janet. So would pipelines, would essentially a plan to build a bitumen pipeline in particular and back that up, would that be enough to quiet the calls to separate, or does something else need to happen as well?
Well, Danielle Smith certainly thinks so, because as she's trying to address this issue, she's made 9 demands to the federal government. And the key demand in there is a bitumen pipeline to Tidewater. She's made some other demands as well. Some of them relate to plastic straws and things like that. But the big demands are around more access, limiting the tanker ban off the West Coast, that sort of thing. And yes, so I think Danielle Smith feels that if we can get some movement, if we feel that the oil and gas industry is not being held back, if it looks like the federal government is trying to sort of open things up for the market, then yes, I think that will do a lot to addressing this issue of separatism.
Okay, well, not surprisingly, Janet, we're watching very interestedly from this part of the country, but always appreciate the insight. Thank you for that.
Thanks for your interest.